The New York Mets took care of business this weekend, sweeping the Chicago White Sox, and thanks to the Phillies, they are now only one game back of the Braves in the wild card race.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Well, here we are, the first week of September. The New York Mets are just one game back of the Atlanta Braves in the NL wildcard race. We have a thrilling month ahead of us as this team makes their playoff push, and I'm starting to feel pretty good about their chances. Yes, this was a bit of an easier weekend for the New York Mets going up against the Chicago White Sox, but you know what? They could have lost any of these games. It's not like there was a single blowout. They were all close, and the Mets had to take care of business, and they did that game after game. And luckily, at the same time, the Atlanta Braves were losing games to the Phillies. The Phillies took their 4-game series, and now it is just that one game. You even look at the Padres and the Diamondbacks we'll talk about later in this show. Those teams have not gotten away from the Mets either. They have the season series victory on both of them. So they have the tiebreaker. Again, this is going to be a thrilling finish to the season. But let's start things off today talking about the game on Sunday, because this one was the tightest one against the White Sox. Garrett Crochet versus Sha Mani lived up to the billing for the first 3 innings, but we knew going in that Garrett Crochet, who at one point was a Cy Young candidate, a guy that was rumored at the deadline to potentially be traded, but there was all the talk about if they were going to trade him, he would need a contract extension to keep being a full-time starter for the rest of the season. Now you sort of see why that deal never happened. They've been limiting his innings. I think I added a little syllable there to innings. Limiting his innings. They've been limiting his innings and pitch count since the deadline, trying to just keep him healthy and on a starter's workload, sort of, through the rest of this season. So the Mets knew going in that they should work some counts, try to burn some of those pitches for him, and he'd be out of the game early. Didn't mean he didn't dominate, though. He struck out the first 7 batters that he faced, and he was perfect through the first 3 innings. Same thing with Sha Mani. So you had a pitcher's duel early, but a stark difference in pitch count. Crochet needed 48 pitches to get through the first 3 innings. Sha Mani, 31 pitches. If you've been paying attention to Garrett Crochet's pitch count lately, 60 was probably the limit, and that proved to be the case. And the Mets were able to get on the board against Crochet in that 4th inning. So even though they did their job to get him out of the game, it wasn't really that strategy that paid off for the Mets, because they didn't do much against the White Sox bullpen. It just worked out that way, where that was sort of the goal early, but the Mets end up scoring on Crochet thanks to MVP Francisco Lindor, who was first pitch swinging, and he hits a home run to put the Mets on the board. And for a long portion of this game, that was the only offense we saw from either side. As I said, the White Sox bullpen was very strong. The Mets did not score another run until the 9th inning, when JD Martinez drew a 2-out walk, and Pablo Reyes came into the game to pinch run. Now, for those of you who might not have caught our shows over the weekend, on Sunday's edition of Locked On Mets, I talked about the September call-ups. That's Alex Young on the pitching side, the left-handed reliever that we saw earlier this season. And then Pablo Reyes, not Luis Angel Acuna. I broke that down at length on yesterday's show, but what I will say now, for those of you who might have missed it, that decision basically came down to this. The Mets want Luis Angel Acuna to play down the stretch every day in Syracuse, and he wasn't going to get a chance to play for the Mets other than a pinch running role. And while I think all of us would have been more excited today to see Acuna standing on first base and scoring on the double hit by Starling Marte, what does that do for his development? So instead, you get a guy on Pablo Reyes who's essentially a journeyman, spent some time with David Stearns when he was with the Brewers. So there's obviously a player skill set that he has liked in the past, Stearns has. So he was brought over to the Mets from the Red Sox in May, had a pretty decent season in Syracuse. Now he's just here to run and play some defense. But he scores his first run in his first appearance as Starlin Marte hits that double, and that gave Edwin Diaz a 2-run lead going into the 9th inning. But let's talk about Sha Mani before that. Because Sha Mani was brilliant once again, and he knew the assignment. He had a tired bullpen, get as deep as you can in the game. There was a large portion of this game where I really felt like Sha Mani was going to go the distance because he was just pounding the zone with his sinker, just pitching to contact, ends up with 5 strikeouts through the first 6 innings. We've seen other performances from Manaea where he strikes out way more. This was just about doing exactly that, trying to get out of each inning with 10 pitches. And he did a really good job of that. It wasn't until he ran into some trouble in the 7th inning that it was clear the Mets were going to need a little bit of a lift. Not much, but still a little bit of lift from the bullpen because, again, I really felt like he was going to get you through at least 8. But in that 7th inning, he hits Luis Robert. Now, the Mets end up getting Robert out on a stolen base attempt as Luis Torrens continues to just be an absolute game changer with his arm. Also, a great tag by Jose Iglesias on that stolen base attempt to do that quick tag to get Robert on the leg. But after that, you still had Sha Mani, who issues a walk with 2 outs. Then he gives up a base hit. And he fell behind on Miguel Vargas 3-0. And Vargas was the guy that broke up Manaea's no-hitter in, what was it, the 4th inning, the 5th inning? I can't remember the exact inning, but somewhere there in the middle of the game. It was Vargas that ended up flaring one out to left and getting a base hit off of him. So I was nervous in that spot. 3-0 on Vargas. He throws a strike, 3-1 count, runners at the corners, 1-0 game at that time, a base hit. Everything could change because the Mets lineup just couldn't get it going today. But Sha Mani was fortunate, to be completely honest, because he threw one pretty much right down the middle. Miguel Vargas got under it, and Manaea gets out of that inning to complete 7 scoreless. We're going to talk about what Manaea has done lately a little bit more in the next segment because it truly is spectacular how this guy has become an ace for the New York Mets. So we'll go over that. But it was a really solid performance to get the Mets to 6 outs left in the game with a 1-0 lead. Reed Garrett comes on in the 8th, pitched a perfect inning. They're going to need Garrett to give you a lot more of that down the stretch with Daniel Nunez and the uncertainty surrounding his injury. If we see him again this season, the Mets do have that one weakness on this team right now, and that is the back end of their bullpen. Edwin Diaz, he looks fine. We were talking about him being a liability last week because of those 2 bad games, one against the Padres, one against the Diamondbacks. Well, he has locked back into form. He struck out the side today to pick up the save. Edwin, I'm not worried about. I'm really not. Could there be a couple more blips on the radar? Sure. But if you look at what he has done since June, he has largely been a really solid pitcher for the New York Mets. Is he 2022 Edwin Diaz? No, that's one of the greatest seasons a reliever has ever had. Is he still a really good closer? Yes. Do they still have Jose Budo? You have a lot of faith in Phil Maton's throwing the ball really well. Absolutely. Reed Garrett has to rediscover who he was early in the season because he still has really good stuff. That splitter is still a great weapon. His breaker is a sweeper slider. That pitch that he has is still a really good offering. He still can throw hard with his fastball. They're going to need Reed Garrett to be one of those guys that you can trust. And if not him, other guys are going to have to step up. So it's good to see Garrett get the job done. It's hard to take too much from this series because it's the White Sox. I mean, the Mets bullpen looked great in this series, largely. So you could say, oh, wow, they're fixed. Or you could say, well, they're playing a team that is going to lose maybe more games than anyone ever has. But still, this was a game that could have got away from the Mets. In that 7th inning, Miguel Vargas at 3-run homer, they lose. And he got a pitch to hit. But luckily, the Mets were able to get through this game. The Braves get walked off in the 11th inning against the Phillies on Sunday Night Baseball. And now we go into that first week of September, like I was talking about here. The Mets are right there, just a game back against the Braves, and they still have that head-to-head matchup at the end of the month where that very well could decide their playoff fate. But the reason why we can have even more optimism about the Mets in this race is because the Padres and the Diamondbacks have fallen back to the pack a little bit, and that keeps the door pretty wide open for this Mets team to sneak into October, which is going to make this such an exciting month and the biggest arm the Mets have to go through this final month, the guy that they're going to be staking their hopes to in a game 162 if they need it, or in game 1 of a wild card round is Sha Mani I want to talk about how he has become the Mets ace in just a minute. First, though, quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. We have something a little bit different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Again, this is all FanDuel customers. You bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with the YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon at a market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook. If you're an everyday listener to the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me anytime news breaks on the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime. You can also take part in our Locked On Mets signed photo giveaways and get a lineup graphic sent to your phone each day so you know who's in the Mets starting lineup without ever having to go on social media. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description or go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Sha Mani is one of the best stories of this New York Mets team. Obviously, if you look back at this season for the Mets, Francisco Lindor is going to be the headliner because he's having an MVP season. And I will say on Lindor, you look at his numbers in Shohei Ohtani in August. Shohei Ohtani had 12 home runs, 15 stolen bases, and he was 15 for 15. Francisco Lindor hit for a higher average, higher on-base percentage. And I believe when you look at the extra base hits, they actually weren't even as far off as you'd imagine because Lindor hit so many doubles. And he's on this hitting streak right now. So we're going to talk a lot about Lindor's MVP case across this final month of the season. I don't think Sha Mani can win the Cy Young this year. I can't imagine it. It's probably going to be Zach Wheeler or Chris Sale. Those are the two front runners right now. But when the writers from the BBWAA have votes, they got to vote for 10 guys. Sha Mani is going to get some Cy Young votes, some down ballot Cy Young votes. That is how good he has been. And you also have to think about the impact on a team. He has clearly established himself as the New York Mets ace. Earlier in the season, we thought it was Luis Severino because Sha Mani did not have a great start to the year. He had good outings for sure, but he had some bad outings. He has locked in to such a high degree over the last couple of months that there's no question anymore. Sha Mani is the ace. In some respects, David Peterson is the 2, and Luis Severino is right there. And we'll talk about Sevy in the next segment as we preview Mets versus Red Sox because the Mets are going to need Severino to give them a good start on Monday, and that has not been as commonplace as we've seen from Manaea and Peterson lately. But what Sha Mani has done to take his ERA in the season now and lower it to 3.35, it has been a sensational run. In his last 7 starts, Sha Mani has pitched 44 and 2/3 innings. So you think about that. He's averaging more than 6 innings per start, and he has 53 strikeouts in those 44 and 2/3 innings pitched. Even more impressive, his whip during that time is 0.78. Now, whip is walks and hits over innings pitched. Anything under 1 is exceptional. A whip of 1 is great. Great. That means you're only giving up a base runner per inning. And if you're doing that and you think about what that means over a start, let's just say you have a 6-inning start and you gave up 4 hits and 2 walks. That's a really good outing. So over a 7-start span of about 45 innings, Sha Mania's whip is 0.78. Far less than 1 walk or hit per inning. So he is doing really well at limiting traffic, and that is why he has such a low ERA. He's also keeping the ball in the yard. The Mets have won 12 of his last 15 starts, and I keep on mentioning this stat after every single start from Sha Mani. On the season, they are 19-8 when Sha Mani takes them out. 19-8. That is a winning percentage of .704. Extrapolate that over a full season, you're talking about a 114-win ball club. The Mets win when Manaea pitches. Down the stretch, he's going to get 5 more starts, if not 6. And 4 or 5 more starts. Apologize. 4 or 5 more starts. He's going to get to 31 starts or 32 starts this season if they need him for a game 162. There's every chance that he's going to finish this year with a sub 3.5 ERA because he's already there and over 180 plus innings, maybe even 190 innings. I don't think he'll get to 200, but the amount of value the Mets have gotten on that contract this year, it's ridiculous. And you look at what he's done. There's been a lot of talk, lately about adopting Chris Sale's arm slot. Said he saw him pitch against the Mets earlier this season. Something sort of clicked for him. Like, maybe I'll drop my arm slot down a little bit more. So he's coming, pretty close to sidearm, 3/4. And that has really helped his arsenal. He said it just feels natural to throw from there. He's also worked on his changeup. So now he throws a changeup. He was talking about it with Steve Geltz before the game, sort of a two-seam changeup similar to what Steven Strasburg had. And he just said it's more comfortable in his hands. He feels better with it now that it's checked off all the boxes when it comes to the metrics where he knows it's a good pitch. He's gained confidence in it. And that really has opened up his arsenal, because you think about what Sha Mani had going into this season. There's the fact that he can elevate fastballs up in the zone with his unique ride that he creates with his arm angle, which has gotten even better throwing more like Chris Sale, and the velocity he's added since going to Driveline prior to last season. That was one of the reasons the Mets really like Sha Mani. The other was his sweeper that he picked up last year, had a lot of success with it. Now you've seen it over this full season. The sweeper has been a really good pitch for him. You have the fastball up in the zone, the sinker, a two-seam that he can throw to get groundouts. And today, like I said, he was just pounding the zone with that sinker because you have a bad team and you're trying to pitch deep into the game, and it really worked. You add in the changeup, and what that has done is it's allowed Sha Mani to be even more effective against right-handed pitching. You see the exact same thing when it's a righty trying to get lefties out. You look at someone like Tyler McGill. One of the things that was so important about trying to add the splitter and why things haven't completely worked out for him is he doesn't always have that pitch to go attack lefties. If he has a good fastball, good slider, which we see with a lot of right-handed pitchers, go up against a righty, that's easy. For Sha Mani going up against lefties, his combination of his fastballs with his sweeper, that's going to work well. You need another change of pace when you have a right-handed batter up, because you can still go backdoor with your sweeper, and that works at times, but you need to have another offering, and this changeup has given him that. And now you're seeing over the last 12 starts, he just has taken off. 8 of the last 12 starts, Sha Mani has pitched into the 7th inning, and in 7 of them, he's completed 7. He just had one outing, I think it was his second to last start here, where he went 6 2/3. But he has been going deep into games all of a sudden, which is a hallmark, calling card of an ace, and doing it at an extremely efficient level as far as preventing runs at the same time as going deep into games. It's been really special to watch. And you sort of think about Sha Mani's future with the New York Mets. Man, they would do anything for him to opt into his contract for next year, but there's no world where he takes that deal unless, and we'll knock on some wood, something happens health related as far as down the stretch. But Sha Mani finishes the season strong. He's going to hit the market, and you look at what that market's going to be for Manaea as he enters his age 33 season. This is a guy that's going to get a really lucrative 3 or 4 year deal, if not even a 5-year deal. I mean, he could be one of the most coveted starting pitchers on the market. I think the top tier is Corbin Burns, Blake Snell, and Max Fried. But if I was a team and I had to look at Max Fried's injury history lately and make my decision on Fried or Manaea, or even Manaea or Snell, who's probably going to be asking for top tier money, as he should, when Blake Snell's on, he can be one of, if not the best pitcher in baseball at times. He's really effective. But Sha Mani is a guy that for a long time was a back-end starter, middle of the rotation starter who could give you innings. Now all of a sudden, he's flashing that frontline potential. There's going to be a lot of teams calling Sha Mani this offseason, and I would think the Mets will be one of them. Manaea is part of that tier with Jack Flaherty and Luis Severino, guys that had really good seasons on essentially 1-year deals. Manaea was the only one of those three that did have that second-year player option. But I'll tell you what, he has, in my mind, separated himself from Severino for sure, but even Flaherty. There's going to be a very healthy market, and I'm curious to see what the Mets do in free agency. You can make an argument that they probably only need to sign one guy, even with Manaea, Severino, Quintana all being free agents, because you should have Kodai Senga coming back Brandon Sproat finally had a good AAA start today. He could factor into the rotation mix next year. Christian Scott could factor into the rotation mix. David Peterson has clearly established himself as a fixture in this rotation for as long as he's under team control. And you also still have Jose Budo, who could be stretched out again, be a starting pitching option. So the Mets have a pretty good amount of pitching depth going into next year, but they still are going to have to sign at least one free agent and ideally a frontline starter. Sha Mani now fits that billing of being a frontline guy. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens when we get to that point. But for now, it's all about this stretch run. And again, like I mentioned, you're going to get at least 4, if not 5 more starts with him down the stretch. And those are games that the Mets are really going to need to win. And I talked about this also on yesterday's show. You can go back and check it out as I was breaking down sort of how things line up with Paul Blackburn returning off the IL. If they slide Blackburn in where I expect them to, which is going to be next Tuesday, the 10th, that would set the stage for Manaea, Severino, and Peterson to pitch against the Phillies. I believe that's in Philly, the first series that they're going to have this month against them. And then it'll also set those 3 up to pitch on the road against the Braves in what is setting up to clearly be the most important series left of this season. So he's going to have some big starts down the stretch, and you got to have a lot of confidence when Sha Mani takes the hill. He is clearly the New York Mets ace. But obviously, he won't be going in this upcoming series. I will preview Mets versus Red Sox in just a minute. First, though, another word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. And the Mets are opening up their second to last homestand of the season. You got Red Sox and Reds this week. Get out to the ballpark, support the New York Mets in a playoff push. The ballpark should be raucous. It should be a crazy environment. Get out there. There's always tickets available over at Game Time. It is the place to go for last-minute deals. Last-minute tickets are great there. When I actually go to a Mets game now, I don't buy my tickets in advance. I wait till I'm about to walk into the ballpark. I pull up in the Game Time app, and I even look at the Game Time picks, which makes getting tickets so much easier because they're going to filter out all the fluff and show you only the incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste your time searching through thousands of tickets. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. Stay up to date with all the latest in the world of sports by checking out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. The Boston Red Sox are coming into town for a 3-game series, and they're not playing their best baseball as of late. They are still squarely in the playoff mix. They got a lot to play for. They're 4.5 games back of a playoff spot with a month to go. If you're in that clubhouse, they're not going to say, oh, the season's over. They got a shot at it. They are actually the first team out of the wild card race, but that race not nearly as close as the one on the National League side. In the month of August, though, the Red Sox went 13-15, and they lost their first game in September against the Tigers to lose their most recent series. Over the past 2 weeks, they're 25th in OPS as a team, 27th in runs scored, about middle of the pack in ERA, although the story of their season has really been that the offense has been there pretty much the whole way, and their pitching, which was great early and allowed them to stay in the race for most of this year, the pitching has started to slide back a little bit. We'll talk about that as we get into the pitching matchups. First and foremost, we got Brayan Bello going up against Luis Severino, and Bello went into this year sort of, I don't know if ace is the right term, but he was the guy that the Red Sox knew was going to be in the rotation for the rest of the season, the guy that has gotten paid the big contract extension to stick around in Boston. Well, on the year, he's got a 4.66 ERA. Early, it was really rough for Bello. Lately, a lot better, 3.27 ERA over his last 7 starts. When we talk about Tanner Houck as the final pitcher in this series, he's had a little bit of an opposite season to Bello. Now, this is a big game for Luis Severino. Final month of the season. This is, of course, so important to the Mets' playoff chances, but also for his free agency. He has done incredible to be healthy this year, to be durable, to eat innings, and you really value that, and that's going to help him in a really big way when it comes to his free agent market because he's going to be able to get a multi-year deal compared to last year where he had to sign a 1-year pillow contract, see what happens. But you look at his last month, Luis Severino has not been great. He had the complete game shutout against the Marlins. That was an incredible performance. He had his start against the Padres where the Mets won that game, where he went 5 innings and gave up just 1 run. But he has not been pitching deep into games outside of that shutout. The rest of the starts in this month, he did not go more than 5 innings. And he basically went about 5 and gave up 4 runs in those other 3 starts. His most recent start, he got pulled with 1 out left in that 5th inning. 1 out left to get, that is. His ERA in August was 4.08. That's not bad. But as we've talked about Luis Severino this year, we have looked at him as a frontline pitcher. He has not always been that. He's probably been more of a mid-rotation guy. And 1-year deal, 14 million or 13 million, whatever it was. That's not bad value, of course. But down the stretch, when you look at a rotation that's still going to have some combination of Quintana, currently McGill, and eventually Paul Blackburn, this is a rotation that needs Luis Severino down the stretch to win 4 of his last 5 starts, to really deliver. And this is a big test because the game 1 of any series is the most important one. And the Mets are on a winning streak. So you want to build off of that. If they can beat the Red Sox here in game 1, you got David Peterson going in game 2. You can keep that momentum snowballing and really, really continue to gain that ground in the standings. We talked about this last week where I mentioned the Mets, the math was against them a little bit when you talked about getting to 88 or even 90 wins, somewhere in that range, 88 to 90, to make sure you make the playoffs. The math was a little bit tough for what they had to do. Well, now you just saw the benefit of beating the Diamondbacks and sweeping the White Sox. The math gets so much easier. And I said on that show where I was talking about this, the Mets may need to reel off 7 in a row at some point, something like that. Well, guess what? You just won 4 in a row. I'm not saying you have to sweep this series. No, win this series, win the next series. All they got to focus on from here on out is winning series. There's really not many left against really terrible teams. The Nationals are on the schedule. The Blue Jays are on the schedule. But those are teams that can still play good baseball. So you don't have another White Sox left. It's just about winning series. That game 1 performance, what we're going to see on Monday night from Luis Severino, that's going to be very, very critical to what happens for the rest of this series. Now, game 2, Cutter Crawford versus David Peterson. Crawford, 4.12 ERA and 28 starts this season. Over his last 7, though, he's got a 6.75. So this should be an opportunity for the Mets to win a game with a guy that they seem to play really well behind in David Peterson. So I feel great about game 2. Game 3, don't feel very good because you got Tyler McGill on the mound. Tanner Houck is going for Boston. Like I said, sort of an inverse of what we've seen from Brian Bayo this year, where it was a slow start for Bayo. For Houck, he was a Cy Young contender early this season. He's got a 3.12 ERA, but over his last 15 starts, it's been a 4.26. So he definitely has come back to earth in a pretty significant way compared to just the otherworldly start to a season. If you look at the wild card race this week, we're going to start doing this as well as we set the stage for each week. Who are other teams playing in this race? The Diamondbacks have 1 more game against the Dodgers. They blew them out by a score of 14-3 on Sunday. So we'll see how that 4-game series wraps up. Can they split against the Dodgers? Will the Dodgers win that series? Then they have a 3-game set against the Giants and then 3 against the Astros. So not an easy week for the Diamondbacks by any stretch. They also still have 7 games on their schedule against the Brewers, who are one of the best teams in the National League this year. They just continue to win games. I know I was doing the power rankings for Just Baseball over the weekend here, and the Brewers at the time of me going through everything had the best run differential in baseball. The Mets and their season against the Brewers. The hope is the Brewers have nothing to play for at that point, and maybe the Mets get some light pitching to go up against to take advantage of. But for the Diamondbacks, the Brewers are still playing for not only their division, which they are far and away ahead of, but they're still playing for a bye. You have the Phillies and the Dodgers, and the Brewers are right there. So they have a lot to play for in 7 games between those 2 teams. There's going to be some opportunities, I think, for the Diamondbacks to fall back and for the Mets to gain ground on them. Now, the Padres are about to face off against a surging Tigers team. They've been playing really good baseball as of late. They then finished their week against the Giants. So that's going to be an interesting week for them. The Giants are going to play both the Diamondbacks and the Padres this week. So We are all Giants fans, and I'm not just talking about the banner behind my shoulder here, the New York Giants. We're San Francisco Giants fans this week. Now, later on this month, the Padres still have to face the Astros and the Dodgers before closing the season against the Diamondbacks. So there's going to be room there for the Mets to gain some ground at certain points. And then we got the Braves. The Braves are off on Monday. And then they have a 3-game set at home against the Rockies before closing out the week against the Blue Jays. So they got an easier path this week. Next week, 1 against the Reds, 2 against the Nationals, and then a 4-gamer against the Dodgers. So the Mets sort of have to just hold status quo, maybe hold ground. It'd be great if they could gain a game and get even, but I don't think they're going to have the opportunity to really jump ahead in the next week, because I think the Braves are going to win a lot this week. It's my assumption, playing some bad teams. But when they had that 4-game series against the Dodgers, that's going to be a great opportunity for the New York Mets to gain some more ground on Atlanta. This is something that we haven't had. We had it in 2022. But even then, 2022, it was clear the Mets were going to make the playoffs, right? We didn't know if they're going to win the division, and the division race was thrilling, them versus the Braves. But there was that security of knowing you're going to get October baseball. The season's going to end in October one way or the other. That was the joy of 2022. It was a little bit less stressful. But part of that stress is what makes this fun. And the Mets in this wild card race, it's going to be such an awesome finish, one way or the other. We're either going to be really frustrated or thrilled. And the expectations of this season coming in were lowered to a point where getting to the postseason is such a huge victory for this franchise, particularly for Francisco Lindor and what he's done in this MVP campaign, the leadership that he showed, and what this season I believe is going to mean to this franchise moving forward. With everything finally in place under Steve Cohen, you have the money and the resources, of course, with Steve, but then beyond that, to have David Stearns now calling the shots and making this a top flight organization, making it to the postseason with this team year one, without Kodai Senga, that's just gotta bode so well for the future. So we'll see how the Mets fare against the Red Sox game 1. We'll see what Sevy does. I'll be breaking down that game and more tomorrow's edition of Locked On Mets. If you're listening on the audio side, make sure you follow wherever you get your podcast, rate, review. If you're watching on YouTube, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. The goal is to get to 10,000 subs by the end of the season. So I appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. You can follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listener, your first watch every single day. Now for your second watch, head over to YouTube and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel that covers absolutely everything the world of sports. Talking about Locked On Sports Today with your local hosts from each team, league-wide hosts from each league. Find Locked On Sports Today streaming 24/7 on YouTube and on Amazon Fire TV.